are now continuing on a repair of this SBD Dauntless dive bomber, and we've gotten the tail together now, but now it's the matter of the wing. Well, we've been quite fortunate on these hinge pins. I want to get these dive brakes off. It's just too hard to think about keeping these things even and with things warped and whatever. And when it crashed, then the takeoff, it went off to the left, and I can't help but think that with these tiny little ailerons out here, that with these things doing crazy things, that could be a contributing factor. But anyway, looking at the pins in there, these are removable pin hinges. So you can get in there with a X-Acto knife and get on the end of it, and we should be able to pull that guy out. And there we go, there's one. Okay, and so we do that with each of them. So we now got our hinge pins all out. Got these off with hinges undamaged, but you know, as you look at these silly things, yeah, not exactly straight. Yeah, this one here, that one's pretty good, but this one just was going all wonky, and that's going to affect things as far as the plane flying. So I'm going to make a basically a flap, and whether I make it out of these or I make something from scratch, if I could get this wonky one straightened out, it might work. Sometimes if you spray balsa with water and then clamp it to hold it straight, that can help straighten it out. It would appear that what's happened to this one is the covering on it is shrunk enough to pull it that way, and it didn't have any covering on the other side to sort of pull it back, so that made it go that way. Of course, this one's also got covering on it, but maybe that covering got hot or something. But at any rate, that's certainly an issue.
Along the way, I had several ideas as to how we might put that wing together. Initially, I thought putting a couple pieces of carbon fiber rod or tube in there and using some blocks attached to the existing joiner could hold it. But that was really complicated as far as thinking how I might do it. Then I thought, well, how about just simply cutting a slot into the end of it right next to that joiner, and then just having another piece of wood that's glued to the joiner inside both. And with that, I might potentially be able to have one of them glued initially. Then as I'm gluing the other one, I would then set the dihedral angle on it, and that would probably work. And that was a bit simpler. But then I had another idea.
Well, we're now up to the matter of getting the wing repaired, and as you can see, we got these that have to go together. We've got that little hole there that little dowel goes into to line that up. But the bigger issue is that we've got this spar here that's busted off. And I really like the way that our little barbecue skewer repair went with the tail. And so I think I'll utilize these again. I believe we'll clean up this to get a flat surface on there. This one is already pretty close to that. Then we will drill some holes in that, perhaps 3 or 4 holes up and down that spar. Those are just going to go in there a short distance because I'm concerned about keeping the drill inside of that beam. But then I'll add one up here, one down there, one up here, and one down there. This is a rather hefty piece of plywood that's in here. And back here, it indents a ways, but it looks like up here, I think that's the same piece, that's solid all of the way. So we should be able to get some good strength in there by adding some more up to the top. And the big challenge is going to be to get everything lined up to where when we have all of these dowels in there, they all line up to push that thing on and glue it in. And we'll epoxy it all over when we put it together. So that's the plan. Okay, so we're going to grind off this bit here. do a trial fit to see whether we can get these things. So let's look for bits. I got glue sticking out all over the place. Okay, combination of sight and feel always helps on something like that. I guess better look at this side too, huh? That's certainly better. Looks to me like it's hitting right here. It's looking pretty tight now. Okay, we need to precisely locate holes on this. So I got this piece of masonite. I'm going to get a block that goes on both sides to mark where the front of it is, and a block back here that goes on both sides to mark the back. I'll put it on this one like that. And this one, of course, is out here, so it has to go on that way. So this one goes that way, that one goes that way. And then we can use that as a drilling template for those holes. Everything ought to match up. Okay, we've put some marks up here on the edge of this beam. So we've marked it there, and we've marked it here. And that will tell us precisely where that beam is. A little bit more perpendicular here. Okay, so that tells us where the beam is, so that when we put this on there, we can know that we got to drill some into there. And then we'll have top and bottom on each side of it into this plywood bit here. Okay, we've cut some little blocks of wood, as you can see here. I'm going to glue one on the very end of it here, right in the middle. Do that so you can, that way so you can see it a bit better on that little piece of masonite. We'll use CA to just glue that on there instantly. I'll put another one on the top of it back here to rest on the top of the wing. These blocks will be the same on both sides, so I have one side of the wing on one side of the wing on the other side, and they'll have the holes in there, and that should make a nice drilling template. So we've got our blocks of wood glued on there, and that allows us to be able to put it on here and get it pretty precise. I'm noticing that this leading edge is angled back a little bit, and I've got maybe a millimeter or so that this is sticking out too far, so I'm going to file off that edge so that it's right next to the material where it's going to govern it. On the other side, it'll be going away from it, so that will not be an issue for this one when it's on this way. Okay, so that's going to work out nicely. Okay, so now we work out the center of that. And then an idea where we want these things. Yeah, that comes pretty well. Yeah, just right there. So we'd want it about there. And in here someplace. And this side, a little bit less critical, but say there. And there would be suitable. So we'll put one out to here, one out to there, and then they'll all be in about a 1/2 inch, 12 millimeters. Okay. About here, and about there, and then 12 millimeters in from here. And that doesn't have to be super precise as long as they're both the same. So down 12 millimeters from there.
And so we measured and we marked up our little guide, and we remeasured and we compared with the wings on both sides and made little adjustments and so forth, until finally we were pretty happy that we had what was needed. But I'll tell you, it was a lot of back and forth getting all of that done.
Okay, we've just drilled the holes in the first part here. We put it on here, taped it on there, drilled through the holes, got the holes in place there. Now it's time to do the other bit. And of course, so this one, that one went on there like that, which means the white side needs to go towards this side. Okay, so white side towards that side, and we verify that it lines up to the middle. That looks good. I'm going to tape it on to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Just don't want it shifting around while I'm drilling, and it means a little bit less attention is needed to keep it from moving around if I got it taped on there. Okay, that all looks good. That looks good. And so now we drill this one. We're drilling perpendicular to the plate is the idea. Okay, feels like we might have balsa on these last two here. But better than nothing. The question will be whether I'll get away with a smaller bit. It's mighty tight. Okay, we've got our wing set up on the bench here. I put a block under the end of that as to where the wing wants to sit naturally, just to keep it there. I've measured at the end of it, and that's 60 millimeters to the end of the tip there. Of course, we've weighted it down in the middle to where it's not going to move. I then come out here, I put the block, same set of block in the same set of position. Measure out here to make sure I got the 60 millimeters, adjust it accordingly, and I note that as I do that I've got a bit of a gap here, and as I lift it up the gap closes, and I can feel that way up there is where that thing wants to set, which is way up at 80 millimeters on the end. I don't want that. So we're going to let it have a little bit of a gap there. We'll have the skewers in between, plus the peg at the back. For strength, I'll use the Gorilla Glue, which will tend to fill in the gap in there. And I think that's going to be okay, but I don't want one wing, 3/4 of an inch higher than the other one in terms of dihedral. That's pretty important. So I think it's just a manufacturing defect as to how the plane was built. It doesn't take much of an angle change here to really change what happens out there. Okay, so I think we're set to get going with the Gorilla Glue. As we do that, if you're gluing foam, you'd be spraying it with water on one side. I don't really need to do that with the wood because it'll have a level of moisture in it anyway, but I did give it a quick spray just for old time's sake or whatever. Gorilla Glue is what we're going to use, the original variety. They may say it's non-foaming, but it does foam, and that's what makes it fill up the gap. It has a consistency very similar to the high-density foam that's used in aircraft, so it's great putting together foam aircraft. But there are times like this where I want it to foam up and give me a bit of a gap filler, much more so than what you get with anything else. So I'm going to put a bit of glue into each of the holes, and then I'll poke it in there with a skewer here in the middle where I want it to fill in. I'll put in quite a bit. This does take a while to set, so you got time to work with things. Here's my skinny skewer. Okay, our little skewers, we've cut to length, and then we sanded off the edges just a bit to allow them to be able to work their way in with the glue. I'm just using this area here to help me get glue on the ends of them. With the Gorilla Glue, with something like this, you need to be prepared for the thing to make a bit of a mess. Now this is going to be interesting. What I'm concerned about is that they might push through. On this one side, they got nothing to stop them. So I'll have to make sure and work them in from the other side. Okay. Some glue on that one. Get our skewer. And put some glue into the holes. Need a little bit extra on the top, I think. Okay, the moment of truth. This way a bit. There we go. Okay. And that one's in. Okay. One of the things we like to do with Gorilla Glue is tape up the joins to force the glue to stay inside. And I must admit I'm making a bit of a mess of this thing. I hope we're going to be okay. 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 A block on that end, that down flat. We ended up taking out a couple of skewers. I just wasn't getting it all together. So we ended up with just the skewers in the spar itself, along with a pin in the back, and then whatever glue we got in there. So we'll see how we go. We'll give it a bit of a strength test to see where we're at. Well, we've got our wing that is repaired. We can now let it loose from the thing. It's the glue is set now a few hours, so it's not totally hard yet, but it is set to where it's not going anywhere. So it hasn't achieved its full strength. And sometimes it's good at this stage to have a look at it, because it's pretty easy to carve with a hobby knife at the beginning. And of course we put this tape on there to keep the glue in place, and it's done a beautiful job of doing that. There's very little that's come out, and you can see it's pretty well filled up the gap in there, on the bottom at least. On the top, a little bit less so. It's got some in there and some where it doesn't have so much. We might think about adding a little bit in there and taping that back up again. I reckon that's going to stay on there. So, didn't get it exactly lined up, but yeah, if we line it from distance, got a little bit more hanger rash, and this plane is done with some purposeful stuff to make it look like it's worn and weathered, and so now we got a little bit more weathering happening there, but at least it's the right color. So I think I'll just add a little bit of glue in there to fill that up. I'll retape that up and just make sure that it's all real good, and I think that'll work. Okay, so there's just a bit here on the top where the glue hasn't totally filled in the gap, and I think for the sake of strength, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of glue in there, put some tape back over it again, and make sure that we've got a real solid join there. But I think that's going to be pretty good. It's certainly very rigid, and I think that's going to hold on there okay. And by the way, with that jig, if I ever do this again, instead of using a thin panel like this, I'll use something that's thick. And that way, when I drill holes in it, it'll keep the drill bit straight going in there. Because I had a horrible time lining those things up, and part of this thing being misaligned, it'd be related to that. So go with a thicker jig to keep the drill straight going in there, and everything will line up much better. Put glue over top, or tape over top of it, but I'm also going to put tape along here just to keep it off of the blue. Something to keep it from dripping out on the end of it there. Now we're going to put tape over top of it to sort of force it down into the crevice. And we want it to stay. Okay, and we'll let that dry overnight, and that should help that be a little bit stronger yet again. Well, our adding in the glue has had plenty of time to cure up now, and just looking at it, you know, I've put the mask in on each side of the join and then added the glue in the middle on the join, and I can feel that the glue has stayed right there, so I'm encouraged, and I think it'll be a good result. Sometimes the glue does stick to the tape a bit. After all, it is glue. But typically the adhesive on the tape will act as a bit of a separator. Okay, so there we go. And just a little bit got out here due to the different elevations of the two halves. Okay, so I'm very pleased with that. so you don't have any on the blue bits. And it doesn't even hardly need any finishing, you know, just very little at all. And actually, in thinking about that, I was going to leave that tape on there to protect it while I finished it off. So, one great big step backwards. The thought is, if I touch that up with a bit of sandpaper, I don't want to be marking up the finish. And I guess this does allow me to go around that bit of a blurb there that came out. That one, I think I'll just do that separately. Okay, so this Gorilla Glue does sand. This is a 320 grit. So by having the tape on there, it's protecting the finish of this plastic and allowing me just to smooth out that glue in the join. Okay, I'm just going to peel it back and get this little bit here. That I'm going to try a Stanley knife, or not a Stanley knife, a hobby knife on. As I mentioned earlier, this stuff does carve as well. So if you have a hobby knife, you can carve on it. Now, having sanded that up nicely, I'd like to put some blue paint on it. What you do when you work on these things is you typically mix up a bit of paint that is the right color for what you're touching up, and you put it in a jar and keep it for future use. Now, I think this was a little bit dark, as I recall, because I painted the side of this. You can see the bit there that came out a bit dark. That was this paint. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter. So for that we need the white. Okay, so I'm just going to lighten it up a tiny bit and see what it does. Always go little by little. Yeah, I reckon that'll work. With this paint, I typically have a bit of Mod Podge mixed in it as well, and my main thinking with that is to try and make it stronger. Now, Mod Podge is normally used as a sort of a sealer on a painting, but I like to use it in a way that was recommended to me by a fellow club member. And of course, I get a lot of good ideas from my fellow club members. But the Mod Podge just makes that paint a bit tougher. The acrylics, otherwise, they tend to be a bit fragile. So we'll clean up a brush, but in the meantime, well, just have a look at what this did. So I reckon that'll be fine. We got a lot of aging sort of looking stuff here, so that just goes along fine with the whole thing. We now have this guy to fix up here. So everything's solid on the side. We've got a rib here, and of course this thing here. So we'll cut back square from there to there. I might make just some little pieces to add to the side of the ribs to glue onto. And then we'll put some new balsa across there. We need a new leading edge, you know, coming up to there as well. So we'll add in that new leading edge. Maybe a bit of balsa on the back of that to glue onto. And then put the panel back to there. And then down to this one down here. This is broken loose a little bit, but that'll glue on, so we just need to square that off to match up to that. I've started by cutting out the damaged and broken bits so that we can see precisely what we've got. With our leading edge here, I'll cut that on an angle so that we got a more strong join between there and the bit that I'm putting in. We've got these little bits here that are being used to put the balsa onto. I don't know if I can cut back to be able to utilize that again. I will. Looking at it up this way, you've got a bit of a I guess you'd call that a rib that's been cut out for the landing gear bay. So we'll not be able to utilize that, so we'll cut up next to that and across here, and then I'll add in something to glue the balsa sheet to along there. And I may as well do that for this one as well. As I look at this little bit here, it's broken loose. Probably kind of hard for you to see, but I can see a bit of a crease across there where there's a break underneath the covering that we're going to want to get. We're going to want to get that glued in place. I can see a little bit of a break up into here, and I've done my best to clear away the covering so that the glue can get into that. And of course I can get it from the other side as well. Then for the leading edge, we've cut it back. I've made sure to leave it connected to this down here, and I'll just shape the piece that goes in there to try and fit in there the best I can, and use some gap filling glue and bring that across to here. I think that's going to pretty well fill in this. I still might straighten that up, I guess, that edge, and then bring this new leading edge right down to match up with that. Well, I've just had a look at this leading edge here, and I'm noticing that it flattens out here right on the end. And actually that flat bit, it starts about that far back. So it'll be starting right about here is where it flattens out. So I put this tape on here. I sighted down from the top to match where the front of it is there, so they can see where the front of it needs to be over here. And then I'm going to take a pencil. We're going to put this piece of balsa on here. I'm going to bring it to where this leading edge is right even with the front of the leading edge there. And I'm going to mark the back of it where my angle comes out at to get the length that I need. And we'll go just a tiny bit longer than that. I also want to mark the angle. And I just had cataract surgery, so my eyes aren't as good up close as what they used to be, and I don't have the glasses to correct that yet. So we'll do what we can. Okay, something like that. Obviously it's way too fat that way, but we'll cut that down in due course. And should we need to add some bits on that, we will. So I've got that marked for the length and the angle, and I'll cut that. And yeah, I think I'll leave it all there, and we'll just carve out what we don't need. Okay, we've cut our little piece here. We've got a little bit of a notch on the back of it here. Cut that in with the radial arm saw. On this end I cut it with a radial arm saw just a tiny bit longer than what it needed to be. Then I used a belt sander to do the angle on there. And looking at it, it could come back a tiny bit. It's a tiny bit proud, started sticking out a little bit farther than what it needs to on the front. I sight in looking this way to make sure that part's straight. I'll take a little bit of sanding and a little bit of filling there. I might just whack just a tiny bit off of the end of it there, and then I think we'll be good. Now, to reduce the amount of hand sanding, I've used the belt sander to get that. And by the way, with the belt sander, what I do is I just turn it upside down so the belt is sitting on the top, and then I can just hold it and work the item on it that way. Did do a little bit of carving there, or whittling. Okay, so anyway, that gets it a lot closer, so there's less hand sanding there. And that is pretty well perfect. Okay, so it's going to come down a tiny bit there, but I'll do that with everything all glued in place. And it'll need a little bit of a filler on the bottom and a little bit of sanding on the bottom, but that's going to work out well. Well, now we've got the two bits on each side to support the sides. We got the bit along the end. This is going to end up getting sanded down a bit and maybe filled in a bit and who knows what else. So now we need to fit the piece in there. A bit of the challenge with regard to that is going to be to find the right thickness of balsa to bring that up even. That's pretty close. This is what I've got. So we'll make do with that. This here will be covered up by the fuselage, but this will be sticking out a bit. So this is the more critical area. Definitely a little bit thinner than what we've got there. But I got thicker and I got thinner, but way thicker or a little bit thinner. So, yeah. Well, we've got our balsa cut. What I did is I cut it just a tiny bit with the tiny bit large with a hobby knife, and then I've actually used a radial arm saw to get it perfect. Just something about the hobby knife going cross grain and trying to take off a fraction of a millimeter is really hard, but it's really easy with a radial arm saw. So I got that just perfect. Now we want to look down at the other end, and that's looking fine as well. So it looks like I got that width correct, and it fits nice and square there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the bottom in place. I put some marks up here where the top edge is, and so I'm now going to mark that on the wood, on the balsa. I'm looking forward to getting some glasses following my cataract surgery, but the distance vision is great, but the close-up vision is lacking a fair bit. Okay, that's close to it. I think it's square, so I'm going to use the saw for that again, the radial arm saw. Okay, we've made a couple of cuts on it to get it very close. So we've got it, so it all fits in there perfect. Fits in here fine, and I think it's interfering just a little bit there, keeping it from going down all the way. So this we will fudge it a little bit. And actually I was going to put something across there to fasten on anyway. come to think of it. So sort of in here is where I want to relieve it a little bit. Yeah, I think we'll get that to fit in there. So we'll see about putting a little piece across there to put this down on. And we've got the perfect sort of thing right here. Okay, and actually we didn't want it square, come to think of it. Then we'll use the curved edge to match the angle of this coming down. Okay. Now, typically when you're putting the balsa on the leading edge of a wing, you glue one end of it, let that get solid, and then you push in the other end and get the other end. Normally, I would start from the leading edge, but since this leading edge is a bit dodgy and I want to make sure it matches up in the back, I'm going to start back here. Now, I always have the question with a CA whether to depend on the wicking to get it in there or whether to put on first and then stick it down, but I want to make sure that it's in the right place, so I'm going to depend on the wicking. And we got access to the back as well, so I can add some more in there to make sure it gets through everything. The thin CA, no problem, but as you get to the thicker stuff, then you always wonder, is it actually going to get itself all the way in there? Put the tape around here to try and protect the stuff from what I just did there. But of course that's covered by the fuselage anyway, but I also wasn't sure about whether it's going to have to do some sanding on here. If you're going to do some sanding, it's good to protect the area around it. Okay, I think that's good and solid. So now we'll get the other part in here. And I was right as far as the thing really wanting a little bit thicker balsa in there, but I think I'm going to glue it in place and then use Gorilla Glue underneath. So I'm just going to hold it where I want it. And right now depend on the edges to hold it. I'm holding it up there to where I can feel with my thumb that it's even with the edge. I'm going to give it some time to harden there. Ideally, you just simply want the right thickness of balsa. It's just I didn't have any. Not worried about it in here. That's underneath the fuselage. This is the part that's going to be showing a bit. So I just need a tiny bit of filler there. Now, having this glued in place, we now need to sand down our leading edge. See if we can get that where we want it to be. Okay, I've just used a medium CA to glue this piece of sandpaper onto this stick of wood. Such that the sandpaper is right at the very edge because I want to sand right into this joint here. Okay, now we've got a little bit down here that we need to rectify. Maybe we'll put a little piece in from underneath, and then we will put filler in on the other side. And it looks like that's just about exactly what the doctor ordered right there. Okay, I think I'm just going to use the normal filler for that. Okay, now we've got the filler in place, and while we're waiting that to dry, I've also put some Gorilla Glue down in this joint here where I held it up a little bit off the edge, and this will fill in that gap and provide additional strength in there. So that's all set to go too. So that can cure while we're waiting for the filler to dry. Well, we've started on the fuselage repair, and you'll be able to see that in the next video. But now is the time to get back to having a look at what's happening with the wing. Well, it's now a day later, and it's time to sand. Down here we've got the a little bit of wood to sand as well. So I think that's going to work. The tape has helped to protect it while I was sanding. I'll put some new covering over this area. Well, hey, the repair is going really well. The wing is coming along. Yeah, we're going to break this up into a couple of videos. So make sure you keep on watching. We got one coming up. We'll be talking about the what we do with the dive brakes. We'll be talking about the servo setup, how to do that, about wing covering and what we did for that repair. And some other things. So make sure that if you haven't done so already that you subscribe. We do this for you, so please subscribe. That will help us out as well. Won't cost you anything, and it'll keep everything handy. And then while you're at it, have a look at some of the other videos that we've got on the channel. I trust that you'll find them helpful. Well, I'm RC Jim signing off. You have a great day and happy flying.